let me test this microphone. Can everybody hear clearly at the back? Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Suchela, for that welcome. I have to say that it's a privilege to be introduced by Suchela, who I've known for many years, in connection with her visits to conferences in Europe and so on. So I feel I'm with old friends here in Thailand. It's also wonderful to meet again people from the other countries of this region, from countries which I visited, China, Malaysia, and so on. So let me thank Thai TESOL for inviting me here to give this talk. Let me also thank my sponsors, Cambridge University Press, for their very generous sponsorship, enabling me to travel to Thailand this week. Now, the conference theme is reflections and directions. And I was thinking, well, what does that mean? Reflections must surely mean looking back, and directions looking forward. So I have a duty to think about what has happened in this field and what is likely to come next. And the topic that I'm interested in is language in the classroom. Later today I'm going to talk a little bit more about speaking outside the classroom, but today I want to look at both. This morning I want to look at inside the classroom and outside the classroom. In terms of reflections, looking back, I can look back on my own career as an academic when I was considerably younger. I'm 108 now, by the way. I have very good face cream. When I was a younger man, I worked at the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and I worked with two very great scholars. I was privileged to work with Professor John Sinclair and Dr. Malcolm Coulthard. And those two names, Sinclair and Coulthard, for our older generation, mean a lot, because it was Sinclair and Coulthard who first really looked at the discourse of classrooms. And they gave us a system for the analysis of classroom discourse, which can also be applied to language outside of the classroom. Now, I'm trying to stop myself from saying language in the real world, because that suggests that the classroom is not real. But of course, for all of us as teachers, the classroom is very real. And for our learners, for students, the classroom is the place where they hear most English. They may read English outside, they may perhaps hear pop songs or movies, but it is in the classroom that they are exposed most consistently and most systematically to the target language, the language they are trying to learn. So in the 1970s, Sinclair and Coulthard published work based on their research in classrooms. Their book was called Towards an Analysis of Discourse. And what they were doing was they were trying to look at language in a different way. To look at language not thinking of sentences and subjects and verbs and objects, but to think of language as a series of actions. That language does things. Language performs actions. And those actions were reflected in the structure of a typical classroom interaction. Now, Sinclair and Coulthard we're dealing with very traditional classrooms, teacher-fronted classrooms. And the exchanges that took place between teachers and pupils were very structured, very predictable. So they consisted of three-part exchanges, as they were called. The teacher asks a question, points to some poor pupil and says, "What's the answer?" The pupil answers, and if it's the correct answer, the teacher says, "Good. Well done. Great." If it's not the correct answer, the teacher doesn't say anything. The teacher is silent. So the teacher says, "Tell me, what is the capital city of China?" And one pupil says, "Beijing." And the teacher says, "Good, well done. Now, what is the capital of Thailand?" And the student says, "Delhi? New Delhi?" And the teacher just goes, and the pupils know that that is the wrong answer, because there is no feedback. So no feedback means you're wrong. So they keep guessing. And the guesses in the Sinclair Coulthard original data, it's great fun, because when the teacher is silent, the students start to make more and more crazy guesses. So they say, New York, London, Cape Town, Rio de Janeiro, and it gets crazier and crazier until finally somebody says the right answer, then the teacher says, "Good, well done." Now those were the classrooms that we can reflect upon. That's our reflection. The very structured, traditional, teacher-fronted classroom. Things have changed since the 1970s. We now have communicative classrooms. We now try to bring into the classroom the kind of interaction which happens outside the classroom. It cannot, of course, be exactly the same, but what I want to propose today is that the classroom is as much a world of conversation and interaction as the world outside, or at least it should be. That's what good classrooms are. Good classrooms are places where interaction takes place in a similar way, not exactly the same, but a similar way to the way human beings interact outside the classroom. I'm also talking about this topic because I'm very aware that our distinguished guest yesterday, Dr. Surim Pitsuwan, reminded us that interaction is the future for the ASEAN region, not only within the ASEAN countries, but between the ASEAN countries and the rest of the world. That global communications are becoming more and more important. And those global communications will not consist of very well-crafted, finely honed business letters which you put into the mailbox. We know that the future of communication will be face-to-face communication, video conferencing, Skype, electronic communications which need to reflect real interaction. So whether we are talking about the language of the classroom, the language outside there in the street, or the language of international communication, interaction is at the heart, at the center of everything. And what we mean by interaction is precisely not just me speaking, but me speaking to you and with you, and understanding you and exchanging with you our thoughts, our plans, our actions. So I'm going to start this talk by focusing on the notion of classroom interactional competence. Now there's a bit of terminology for you. If you take away one piece of terminology from this conference, perhaps this will be the one, the little jewel, I hope, that you take away. Classroom interactional competence. It is a concept that you will hear more and more about in your professional development. It's a fairly recently coined term. But what does it mean? What is it? I quote here my good friend from the University of Newcastle in England, Steve Walsh. Walsh, in his 2011 work, says classroom interactional competence, that's CIC we call it here, is teachers' and learners' ability to use interaction as a tool for mediating and assisting learning. What this means simply is the use of conversation, not just for the sake of telling me about your family or telling me about your hobbies or talking about the ASEAN countries or talking about the economic future of the world, but conversation for the purpose of learning. In this notion of classroom interaction and competence, the moments when conversation is happening most successfully are the moments of learning opportunity. We'll come back to that idea in a short time. So there is a match between conversation, interaction, and actually learning. They go together. Walsh, in 2012, he keeps publishing it every year, we can't shut him up. 2012 places interaction at the center of learning. In other words, the best learning takes place when the best kind of interaction takes place. So this is going to be something different from the traditional notion of classroom language, the classroom exchanges where the teacher says, what's the capital of Thailand? The student says, Bangkok. The teacher says, good, well done. That's the right answer. So we're looking for something a little bit different from that. We don't exclude that completely, that kind of exchange. Of course it helps, but we want something more. In the notion of classroom interaction and competence, it is not just the ability to be fluent, and I'm going to talk more about fluency in my second presentation today, but suffice it to say that fluency is the ability to use language easily and spontaneously. Nor is it just accuracy. The goal is not to be fluent, the goal is not only to be accurate, the goal is joint activity. Activity with other pupils and with the teacher in order that learning takes place. One of the problems that Walsh and his colleagues identify is that speaking tests, examinations for speaking, do not always reflect how successfully candidates interact. I was an oral examiner for many years myself, and the oral examination consisted of me getting the candidate to talk. That was the goal. Make this person speak. The goal was not really interacting with that person. The goal was, does this student have sufficient speaking skills to make himself or herself understood? So that is the, if you like, the traditional oral examination. Can you make yourself clearly understood? What we're talking about here is more, can we judge how successfully the candidate is interacting? At this point, I'm going to mention a project that I'm connected with, a very important project called the English Profile Project, which is a very large-scale international research project where the goal is to benchmark the performance of students at the different levels of the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. Please don't get hung up on the E, the European. My prediction, if I look to directions for the future, my prediction would be that at some point we will quietly drop the E. And it will no longer be the common European framework of reference, it will just be the common framework of reference. And in that framework, we are looking at how students perform at different levels. So what can we expect if a student is A2, it goes A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. I don't know if it goes any further, maybe it goes to heaven. So above C2 is heaven, it must mean that below A1 is hell. But seriously, in this system, we are interested in 5 skills, not just 4. We are, of course, looking at how students perform when they read, when they write, when they speak in the way that I'm doing now, giving presentations or performing in oral examinations. But we're also interested in the 5th skill. We call this 5th skill interaction. Your ability to reach out and relate to another person. So good oral examinations perhaps will have 2 candidates interacting. There may even be 2 examiners and 1 student, and there is a sort of triangle of interaction. So that's the goal, the 5th skill. We hope that the common framework of reference will be based on these 5 skills: reading, writing, speaking, listening, and interaction, the 5th skill, as we call it. Now, how do we get at interaction in the classroom? Well, we get at it by actually doing what we do outside of the classroom, by analysing conversations. Outside the classroom, in the other world out there, we have a long tradition of conversation analysis, where we look at how conversations develop moment by moment. Not sitting like a bird above the conversation and looking down, but actually watching it happen in real time. Understanding how each action in a conversation relates to what has gone before, and how each action in a conversation predicts or sets up what is going to happen next. Yesterday, I had the good fortune to attend the presentation by our featured speaker, Jirasili Kasimsin from Mahidol University. I have to look at the paper when I read Thai names because I find it very difficult to remember Thai names. But her presentation, Dr. Jirasili Kasimsin from Mahidol University, her presentation was a model of good conversation analysis. And not conversation analysis in the street, but conversation analysis in the classroom. The goal is to see if something like a real conversation happens when students are interacting. So if we are doing group work or pair work or some kind of collaborative work in the class, or if students are interacting with their teacher, to what extent is this real interaction? That is not the same question as the question we have asked many times in the past, which is, how good are the dialogues in the coursebook? Are the dialogues and the audio in the coursebook, are they natural, are they real conversations? That is not the issue that I want to look at now. What I want to look at now is how real is the conversations that we have about those dialogues, the conversations that we have about grammar, the conversations that we have about the listening task. It is there that scholars now believe that we find the learning opportunities. What David Willis and Jane Willis call in one of their articles, golden moments. Isn't it a lovely metaphor? The metaphor of the golden moment. Those moments when learning can either happen, and we can help it to happen, or learning opportunities are lost, are missed. Okay, so that's the conceptual framework. To understand best what happens in classrooms, we need to look at what it is that makes good interaction outside of the classroom. Now, there are many things. There are hundreds of things that we could look at, but we only have 40 minutes or so, so I can't look at everything. But what I want to look at is some core features of interaction outside of class, and then see how they are reflected inside the classroom. I'm going to look at the use of discourse markers. These are little words like well, so, right, okay, little words like that. I'm going to look at words that show you how you respond to something, and I'll explain this in a moment. And I'm going to look at what are called small words. Small words are the little words that we hardly notice when we use them. But these are words which are closely related to the perception of fluency and good interaction. Let's start with discourse markers then, shall we? I say shall we, but of course you can't all say no. It would be horrible if that happened. Discourse markers. Just to take right and well. Those are two good examples of discourse markers. I choose them because they are both in the 40 most frequent items in conversation. Now you may say, so what? So what? Why are you so excited about these two words? Well, I'm excited about them because if I look at how frequent words are in conversation, most of the frequent words, maybe 100 of the most frequent words, are in fact grammar words. Words like articles and pronouns and modal verbs and prepositions and conjunctions. But right up there with these in the spoken language are these two words, right and well. If we do the same count on the written language, they are not there. They are not in the top 40. So they are obviously important when it comes to spoken interaction. In 5 minutes from now, I'm going to twist this around my ankles and fall over, so don't be shocked if it happens. We'll start off by looking at, as I say, out there in the other world. Please correct me. If I say the real world, shout out no, okay? I don't want to use that term, the real world. The other world out there, here's a typical conversation. This is people talking about their holidays that they're planning. They're planning a vacation, a holiday. And the first speaker says, see, these are like 13, 14 nights. They're looking at web pages and catalogues. It doesn't say what they do, does it? Well, self-drive tours, but, oh, right. So they don't know how many nights. Oh, yeah, they do, look. When you look at real conversations outside of the classroom, you inevitably come to the conclusion that everyone is crazy. That nobody is coherent. Nobody speaks logically or coherently. This is how we speak. But in context, it's not a problem. We understand one another. I've highlighted here the discourse markers well and right because they are so frequent. The well there suggests, I can't really say yes or no. It doesn't say what they do, does it? And the other person could have said, yes, yes, it does, yes, or no, it doesn't. But very often when we have a yes-no question which we don't want to answer with yes or no, the best word to answer it is well. Okay, so typically, because I publish with Cambridge University Press, people always assume that I live in Cambridge. And they say, so you live in Cambridge. And I always answer, well, near Cambridge. Because I live in a little village out in the countryside, outside Cambridge. Now, when they ask me, so you live in Cambridge, I could just say, no. No. It would be correct. I don't live in Cambridge. No. It's not very friendly, not very interactive. It's rather a way of saying, you're a fool. So what I do is I say, well, near Cambridge. Well, near Cambridge. And that's my way of saying, I cannot answer your question as a yes-no question. I have to shift the discourse in a different direction. Oh, right, says the other person. Right here means, oh, now I understand, now I see it, yeah? Okay, now we can move on to the next bit of the conversation. So this thing is happening in real time, step by step. We cannot predict exactly what the next utterance will be. But you can see how they are mentally working out this problem together. This is not the classroom, this is ordinary people sitting at home. Well, it tells you how, so there's another well. They're there all the time. The interesting thing is that research shows that people are not aware that they use these words. Many times I've given talks to smaller audiences, and then we have a question and answer session. And someone will stand up and say, yes, this is all very interesting, but I can't teach my learners this kind of thing. And you say, why not? And they say, well, it's not important language. Well, it's not important language. Well, it's not important. You see, you just said it. Oh, did I? Well, I didn't know I was saying it. So they are small words. We're not terribly conscious of them, but they are fundamentally important. They are in the top 40 words in conversation. So if you want to learn English, it would be crazy to go to a school or university where they said to you, we will teach you everything you need to know about English, except the most frequent common things. That would be a rather Alice in Wonderland college, wouldn't it? Okay. Who uses, we're going to focus on right. Who uses right in the classroom? So we're coming from that other world into our classroom world. How do we find out who uses right in the classroom? Well, we look at a corpus. In this case, we're going to look at a corpus of classroom discourse. We're going to look at a couple of corpora, in fact, of classroom discourse. We're going to look at something called the English Profile Corpus, which is connected to the research project that I mentioned earlier. And we're going to also look at some oral examinations. But let's start with the classroom. Who uses right in the classroom? This is from our English Profile Corpus. We have teacher, and we have all the students. And this is how it looks. Okay? This is how it looks. It's teachers who always say, right. In fact, I remember I had a PhD student some years back, an international student who was a non-native user of English, but he was very good English. But he always alarmed me slightly, because he would come to me for his advisory sessions. And he would come into my room and I would say, hello, how are you? And he'd say, very well, thanks, how are you? And I'd say, I'm very well, thanks. Then he would say, right, I want to ask you some questions today about my research. And every time I would sort of flinch a little bit, and I wanted to say to him, hang on, right is my word. I'm the person who says right here. I'm the one who says, right, how can I help you? So it was a kind of odd relationship. Now really, I should have been proud of him. I should have been proud of the fact that he was taking control. He wasn't afraid to say, this is my supervision, this is my research, we are here to discuss my research. But it's because I was a teacher, because I expect that this is my work, it's not your work. And this is reflected in most classrooms. There are some of more than 100 examples, there are just 6 where students say right. And they say it when they're doing pair work and group work. That's when students do it. So if we want our students to reflect this kind of usage, they will not do it to you as a teacher. You know, if you say, open your books on page 97, and 35 students say, right. Okay, what's next? Right, what are we going to do? It's strange, isn't it? So, the use of these little words reflects how you construct your classroom. Write maybe one of your words, but what you've got to do is give students the opportunity to make it their word, to make it their property. Let's move on. Let's have a look at the classroom. Here's an example. T is teacher, and this teacher says, okay, right. What about you, Olga? And Olga says, I'm going to Russia, to Moscow. Teacher says, oh, nice. Olga says, yeah, I'm going to do a summer course in Russian language, and I'll be with a host family too. Okay, how long for? For a month. Right. July. Very good. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Very good. Excellent. This is a nice classroom. Obviously, this teacher is a nice person, friendly, engaging with the learners. But there are things that we should observe here. First of all, it is the teacher who says right and says it twice. Okay, right, right. Olga, the student, she just says, yeah, she responds there. But teacher says, okay, right, very good, excellent. And teachers love saying that, don't they? Very good, excellent. What is it that's very good and excellent? Is it Olga going to Russia? Or is it Olga's grammar? Or what is it? It's half and half, isn't it? You've all heard these funny stories, and if you were at my presentation the other day, forgive me if I repeat myself now, but what happens in classrooms sometimes is the teacher says, tell the class what happened to you the other day. And the pupil stands up and says, I fell off my bicycle and hurt my ankle. And teacher says, she fell off her bicycle and hurt her ankle. Excellent. Very good. Wonderful. Now this is a rather strange reaction. In the other world, if someone said, I fell off my bicycle and hurt my ankle, you would not say, oh, excellent, good. Well done, right. Very good, excellent. We would, of course, need to react in a different way. And somehow we have to bring into the classroom this ability to react in a normal human way. I'm not talking about reacting like a native speaker, becoming a little Brit, becoming a little American. That's not the goal. The goal is to become a human being in the classroom, to become your normal, interacting self. All human beings interact. Interaction is something which distinguishes us as human beings. We interact in a way that's different from the way that plants and other animals interact, and the way that chemicals in the environment interact. What about exams? Let's continue with our little word right and look at oral exams. Here we have the examiner and the candidate. Still looks pretty grim. It's a little bit better, but again, you see, in an oral examination, if you are the candidate, you can't say, right, ask me some questions, come on. Test me. Right, here I am. So in the typical oral examination, it is only the examiner who is allowed to say, right. That is if you are in the traditional exam setting. Examiner, candidate, candidate, examiner. Good oral examinations, again, set up the situation differently with, for example, paired tasks, so that the learners do have the opportunity to say to each other, right, let's do this task. Right, let's see what we can talk about here. What about well? Who uses well in the classroom? Any predictions? Well, let's have a look at well. This is now from a slightly different corpus, and it's an interesting corpus, this one. It's a corpus of classroom interactions where the students are a mixture of native users and non-native users. These are students who are in training. It's a training, professional training context, and they are training to be hotel managers in the catering and hospitality industry. So here we have three possibilities. We have the teacher, we have native user students, and non-native expert user students in the same classroom. This is the use of well. And now we have a completely different picture. It's interesting. So well, here, now it looks as if well isn't a student word. You can possess the word well. And we ask ourselves, well, why? Well, why? And you see, I can't stop saying it myself. What is it makes well a good word for students? Well, the answer is, students are always responding. And when they respond, they sometimes need time to think. They sometimes want to say something different from the direction of discourse that is predicted. They want to manage the conversation a little bit themselves. So well is okay. And notice, the non-native users are not quite as frequent as the native users, but who cares? Who cares? The goal is not to make them native speakers. The goal is to see if they are able to manage the interaction in the way that they would as normal human beings. So it does seem that with these discourse markers there are differences. They are distributed differently, and we need to look at the micro context. This is why conversation analysis is so important. We can't just look at the classroom as a set of succeeding structures or succeeding exchanges one after another. We need to look at how actions are performed and how they transform the conversation moment by moment. It is these moments of transformation when students take control, when they act in particular ways, these are the moments of greatest learning. When they are actually interacting, they are more likely to know what it is they're learning, why they're learning it, to notice what it is that they're doing. So the hypothesis is fairly simple, really, and that is there are several ways of learning how to be a good speaker in class. One is to have good dialogues in your textbook, good audio facilities. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is that you learn to speak by speaking. You learn to interact by interacting. And the classroom is the place where you spend most of your time. So the classroom is the place where, please, let's give you the greatest opportunities to interact. Even if it's just with you, the teacher, at least try and make it more interactive. Now you might say, well, I don't have much time for that in my classroom. Time is precious. We have to do grammar, we have to do reading, we have to do listening tasks. Well, this is where the beauty of the e-learning transformation comes in. We are all aware now that blended learning and online learning is becoming more and more important. So we can move to the online world, those more static ways of learning, grammar tests, listening tests, reading tests. The computer can handle a lot of that for us. But when it comes to interaction, this should remain in our classrooms. And it should be something that you as teachers are responsible for managing. Now, I'm aware time is flying here. I'm going to ask my chap at the back, I can hardly see him. How many minutes? 5 minutes, he says. Sorry? Oh, there's an idea thing, yes. Okay, so 5 minutes. Sorry? The 5 minutes already gone. Yeah, okay. All right. I better shut up then. Okay, so what I'll do is I will jump, in fact, now. I'm going to jump at the speed of light, Oh, look at this. Good Lord, good Lord, good Lord. Look at that, look at that, look at that. Absorb it. Right. Absorb it. My goodness, we can do this for every word of Whoa. It's like one of those science fiction things, isn't it? Yeah, we'll come back to this afternoon. Here we go. Right, here we go. I will be talking more about these things in my next presentation. My conclusion then is this. Based on the evidence so far, the classroom is a conversational forum. That is when classrooms are at their best. It's when they are like conversation in the real, the real world, in the world outside, the world out there. Successful classroom interaction shapes learners' contributions. We are not talking about a random set of conversations. We are talking about your responsibility, the responsibility of good teaching materials, the responsibility of the curriculum to shape the environment in which learners can use conversation so that it maximizes the opportunities for learning. Successful classroom interaction maximizes learning opportunities. And it can be taught and practiced. We can have good teaching materials that teach conversational skills which can be used in the classroom and not just out there in the other world. Syllabus and materials should give learners the repertoire of conversation so they can use it not just in activities to replicate the world outside the class, but for training in interaction and negotiation with teachers and other learners in class. So my reflection is we look back on 40 years of good classroom analysis. We've moved from seeing the classroom as a set of static structures to seeing the classroom as a place of real conversational action, to the belief that how we shape those actions is how we shape learning itself. Thank you very much for listening to me.
So much, sir. Number of things of the day. Most of all, we have direct our attention to interaction, and watch the small words and so many things we fail to teach our students in order to help them generate more interaction and golden opportunities, learning opportunities. Thanks so much. It's just like having excellent dinner. We want more and more of Professor Michael McCarthy. Thank you so much, sir.